What's up, everybody, and welcome. Today, I am sharing a very special video from a recent 11-hour live stream that was done for the Theory Underground 1-year anniversary. Theory Underground is a teaching platform that I built on both iOS and Android apps, as well as an actual website. There's a sort of social media and club aspect to the site, but ultimately everything is centered around the courses, and the courses are centered around the research, and the research is centered around an overarching plan. And so with that all said, I want to get out of the way here because I think you're probably here for the more important thing here, which is the interview with Dr. Leon Brenner. I couldn't be more excited for you all to see this. It's going to be on the clinical structures of psychoanalysis and autism, specifically the histories of autism theories and the different usages of the word. And so I hope that you will enjoy this interview, but if you would like to see the other event that it was based in, the 11-hour live stream for the 1-year anniversary, then you just check out this right here. And there you go. With that, I'll turn it over to Leon. Hope to see you in this course because it's going to be amazing. Peace. All right, everybody, welcome to Theory Underground. I am your host, David McKerracher, and today we're joined by Leon Brenner. Dr. Leon Brenner, welcome. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Thank you.
It's a pleasure and honor to have you. And so, yeah, today is like sort of like this all-day marathon live stream event, but actually you were the person that I was first, like in the last couple weeks, like kind of like, okay, when are we going to have this conversation, right? And then when I realized that this day was open, because I thought I was going to be traveling, I was like, this is perfect. We can do it. And then I was like, you know what? To signal boost this, let's do all the stuff I wanted to do in December. And so I love these marathon streams, but your work in particular has been something that I just cannot stop thinking about. And so I honestly, I'm not the right person to introduce you. Yeah, I think you should do it yourself. But I will just say that my point of entry into like knowing anything about you at all is through The Autistic Subject, a book that you published, I don't know, recently, and it's something that I've been listening to while working at Amazon. I only get so much from it, but we're ultimately having you here to announce that Leon Brenner is going to be teaching the clinical structures of psychoanalysis, Freud and Lacan, as well as the autistic subject. So everyone put your figurative or literal hands wherever you are in the world together to welcome Leon. Leon, could you tell us a little bit about how you came to this research?
First of all, thanks for having me. I'm very excited about the course. I've been working a little bit to make it interesting and adding some new things. So adding some new factors that I've been working on recently. I've been asked this a lot, like anyone who would write a book, and Dave, you know that as well. You were asked what brought you to write about this, and it's something like you would ask a very happily married couple, for instance. Well, how did you meet? Well, what? And people expect a very fantastic story. And if it's a love story, it's always fantastic, right? It's 1 in a million. There is something to it. I'll summarize it. I got into psychoanalysis because I forgot to pay my tuition as a bachelor student, and it was not very much. Well, I always was into Freud, but not what some would call a fanatic. Today I spend my professional life fully in engagement with psychoanalysis. But yeah, I forgot to pay tuition, and I could only enroll.
Is that because you believed the American leftist propaganda that education's free in Europe? No.
I guess so. No, it's not very high. That's true. But you need to pay it.
Yeah. Okay.
So I forgot to do that. I was much more forgetful at the time. And it only left some courses available because I was late to the party. And that's how I started being interested in psychoanalysis, by accidentally studying it. With autism, it was a little different. It was a bit more calculated. I just found it to be a fascinating word, and particularly the meanings, the many meanings that it has in different discourses and fields of science, of culture, of politics, and I found it to be so fascinating that I decided to spend many years working on it. And that's it. It's not a personal story or something that has to do with my own personal life. It is just my curiosity. We might say, this is the title of the book that you're speaking about, Dave. The Autistic Subject on the Threshold of Language. That's the full title. It's published 2020. It's the thresholds that I think, in retrospect, might have been interesting for me. Being on the thresholds, I think, is already a fascinating notion. And I think that got me into working on autism, a phenomena that is in many places on the threshold.
Yeah, and so this we're doing this in the midst of a marathon stream, but also we're doing a very special thing here, which is we're recording this as a separate standalone video. I think a lot of people will come to it for the thumbnail that says Theories of Autism. And that's ultimately what our topic is for this segment, not just the announcement of the course or whatever, but theories of autism. You already kind of alluded to this with the different names or the different understandings of the term. Yeah, the different understandings. And so maybe that's a good way to start, is to talk about like some of the common usages, misconceptions, and then let's talk about the history.
Well, let's give it a shot. Huh? We'll do some of it. We'll leave some for the course itself. But yeah, let's try and have some fun. Let's see where we get to.
Well, let's start with what my wife said to me earlier today, which was, are you going to ask him why everybody's autistic now? Let's start with that meaning of the term,
It is an important question for a wife to ask, because it is true that any husband or all husbands, I'm making a wager here, but are somewhat autistic within a relationship. And this shows you that this word can be understood in so many ways. Here we're speaking about the fact that if you are lucky and you are in fact in a love relationship with a subject that is other to you, there will be a misunderstandings on a very profound level. And let's say, going contra to what many couples therapists would try to do, reaching a place where communication can bridge the gap between the subject and the other. Well, in psychoanalysis, we are somewhat aware of the fact that there is no sexual relationship. This is what Lacan is known to famously say. But it is the fact that if it is in fact another subject, then there is something that is left outside of your reach, that you will never understand. This is the whole idea. So some people say, and maybe justly so, about husbands that they are a bit autistic. There is something out of their reach. They don't understand, which is true. And this word is used in this way. And what I want to say today, and we'll go over some manifestations is that, well, this is not how I use it.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe colloquially, maybe fun, maybe between us. Yeah, I'll tell you, Dave, you're a bit autistic. You should listen more.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, so this is what people might call autistic traits, and the idea that there is some type of maybe personality or personal qualities that have to do, and I think this is very colloquial, with autism. But again, autism also means something political. I don't know if you're aware of the neurodiversity movement, for instance, in the US and worldwide, and it's a movement composed of people that argue that, let's say, syndromes like autism or other forms of that other forms of psychic, what in the DSM and the ICD is called a psychic or psychological illness or disease, are in fact variations in the brain's composition. So there are neuronal variations, and not diseases. And here the word autism gets a different meaning. It is a designation of a particular form of variation. And it's important, and it has ethical repercussions, and it means something about the politics of subjectivity.
Right.
Here we see a different meaning. Also, we can step a bit closer into the clinical domain. And, today, many people go and get an autism diagnosis. And you go to a psychologist and they spend a few hours with you, and then they give you a little diploma. Now, this diploma might be nice to hang on the wall, but it also means something economic. It means money, yes, because children get an autism diagnosis, get funding for their schooling. They get funding for help circles. And this means that the signifier autism is also an economic signifier. It means something that translates to capital, to money, to actual money. And here I'm not trying to infer anything that might be perceived as being sinister. I think this is done in a very charitable way. I've spoken to some colleagues who even told me that they give an autism diagnosis even if they are not sure or don't really think that that's the case, but they say that this child will profit from whatever economic support they will get from the government because of this diagnosis. So you see that autism also is an economic thing.
You have to say that you mean this in this more charitable way because, and not sinister, because there's the obvious kind of whiplash you can get for even saying something like that. Like someone might be like, oh my gosh, you're giving people this basis to doubt the diagnosis, and that's dangerous and harmful. And I just want to be transparent from my standpoint. That's all part of this. There's a side of the activism of every movement online, especially, that's so worried about the outcome of anything that you might say, that the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater. And there's also social capital and cultural capital involved. It's not just economic, because there's at a certain level you can go like, it's like, yeah, I'm awkward and weird sometimes, and I do social faux pas. But guess what? I'm autistic, so don't worry about it. And also, you're a neurotypical, which is like the new cis. So it's like, oh, you're like, which cis was the new WASP. It's just like, oh, you're like this thing at the center, and that sucks because we hate the center. And so like, there's this actual thing that forms. And I have to say, like, I like individuals, not like these coagulations of like hashtags, right? Like so at a certain level, the baby with the bathwater there that you're trying to honor by saying that you're trying to be charitable here is that it's also true, though. It actually can help the child.
Yes, absolutely.
right? Okay. And that's great. But that's not the usage that you're using.
Yes, this is the point. It helps children to receive extra funds from the school, from the government. It's a great thing. Yes, but again, it's speaking about autism in a different way. It translates in our social systems in a different way. And Dave, you've mentioned social capital. That's true. You have celebrities that identify as being autistic. And this, as you were saying, speaking about the neurotypical, etc., this brings us more into the domain of identity politics. And in this domain, the signifier autism, it carries a cultural capital. It says something about you that is not even negative. It's not something that one would like to hide, for instance, as was the case in the past.
If you were especially, and this is one of the good things about the activism, is making us historically aware of how Nazis were exterminating autistic people actively, right? Like, that's my understanding based off of a little bit of, I've heard about about Dr. Asperger and the work that he was doing and trying to save the functional ones because everyone else was being murdered, right? Yeah. And so, and that is the concern with when people are advocating for like this sort of identity politics approach that also all of its emphasis goes towards destigmatization. Mm-hmm. I think most of the destigmatization approaches don't work, but I think that what's driving that concern is the most honorable thing. If it is a genuine concern with the fact that historically this not only has happened once, but happens, it just that people go, oh, well, because you're this variation. Well, you're actually just a faulty product or whatever. We need you out of the gene pool, that whole approach. Right. So I do have respect at a certain level for this discourse that I just want to emphasize that because it is a careful, touchy topic.
Yeah. It's important to emphasize. And what did I want to mention here? Well, it will come back. But I was thinking about, for instance, and we won't get into this today, but I'll just mention this, that let's say after we can develop a framework through which we can understand autism in the course, we'll also think about the ways autism is treated and engaged with clinically today. And the most prevalent form of autism treatment, let's say, is a cognitive behavioral method called applied behavioral analysis, ABA. And I very much go against it. I'm one of its opposers, mostly because I argue that I listen to autistic people who say that it was quite difficult for them, even tormenting the experience on some levels. But again, I'm saying that ABA practitioners are not sinister people. They're not evil people that want to hurt autistic people. They're just, are uninformed of the different dimensions that I think are important to tackle, to handle, to acknowledge when engaging in clinical work with autistic people. So, again, we have this critique, and we will see it unraveling on many levels. But again, that is not to say that there's some malevolent force trying to exploit or undermine autistic subjectivity. But that's at least how I view things.
So, so far, historically situating this, you've kind of started with the present, and you've focused on the prominence and the rise of the discussion about the neurotypical versus the you had said neural variations, but we also say divergence, and so that would be. Would you say that is kind of the most popular current point of entry into thinking about autism?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I know it is popular among many autistic people because it depathologizes this let's say a name for pathology in a diagnostic book. It bestows agency upon autistic people. We might say even epistemic agency of knowing what autism is, saying what autism is, rather than psychiatrists saying what they are. And it acknowledges autism as a way of a mode of existence rather than a disability. So it's quite an empowering discourse. Today in academy and where people do research on autism, none of them work in psychoanalytic field, sadly, but well, a few. Mostly, we see psychologists working in psychology departments. We do see a shift in the academic discourse also. So this is something I can say, and you can see that if you read sort of the progression of papers published by some prominent autism researchers, you see how it starts as a disorder, a disease, something to be investigated and then eradicated, in this sense, finding a cure for autism. And this has transformed into a discourse about the care for autistic people. So you see that in academic discourse as well. So that's quite interesting. But I would say that the neurodiversity discourse is more prevalent among autistic people themselves, some researchers. And we would say this kind of discourse of care, scientific discourse of care, that is becoming more prevalent in the scientific community. But I mean, you can go to Google Scholar and look that up. We shouldn't bore our listeners with these literature reviews, right?
Right. Well, I guess so. I mean, I'd say my listeners are a mixed bag. There's quite a few in there who I think that they probably are, as we'll get into, on the obsessive side of the neurotic, and so they'll go down that, and they would probably listen to you talk about it for 10 hours. But we've got to keep everybody in mind, I guess, when it comes to this one. So maybe, yeah. So the development of, I guess my main question then is about the clinical structures and how autism relates to the clinical structures, because I think historically there's 3 clinical structures in psychoanalysis, and those are the neurotic, the psychotic, and the pervert. Is that right?
Right.
All right. And then traditionally,
one second.
Okay, for sure. What's up, everybody? I'm going to sit here and talk to you all while Leon steps away. Oh, I don't even have to. I was prepared to entertain people for who knows how long. So. Oh
no, I just had to tend to something quick.
Cool.
So yes, we're speaking about the clinical structures, and let's take a step towards. Speaking about that, let's speak about the clinic. So many people that come and see me in that context, in the context of an analysis. Many of them begin by saying these words, "Oh, I'm autistic. Tell me I'm autistic. I know you wrote this book. How about you use this knowledge that you have to tell me that this is what I am, who I am, how I should be, etc." And this is what we might call the desire or the demand for diagnosis. I have to tell you, sort of between us or the listeners, without divulging any information, private information, of course, but that many of these people, in fact, only after a few weeks, don't really struggle with this question of diagnosis of autism in their analysis. They do the work it's actually irrelevant for them. It's not a big issue, but it starts that way. It has to start in a way. There are some people that I've worked with that we have worked in the context of let's say, an analysis of autism. That's true. But many, were, as you were saying, Dave, obsessives looking for a word, a signifier that will put an end to their suffering, that will name it and therefore negate it. This is what we might say is a request, a demand for the analyst to provide signifiers for their identification. But the work in analysis with neurotic subjects, and we'll just say it very briefly here, is, we might say, contrary to that. The work is not to achieve identifications, but actually to go against identification. This is what Lacan called the process of depersonalization, shedding off our identifications and reaching a point where they do not function as they did previously. So for me, when we speak about the clinic and the structures, autism is not even that. It's not even a diagnosis that we might associate with the DSM or the ICD, these diagnostic manuals. I would even tell you that if someone is very insistent in receiving a diagnosis, I do have the ICD on my shelf. And if someone really struggles, I tell him, look, take the book. It's not very thick. Take the book, go over the diagnoses, see what works for you, and you can come back next week and we can agree that is it, and we can put it to the side. So again, this is not what I'm referring to when I'm referring to autism from a clinical perspective. So what am I actually speaking about when I speak about autism? And I do view it as a clinical category, as a structural category, as you were saying, like neurosis, perversion, psychosis. Sort of my shtick, as they say, in previous years was to say autism is a fourth one. We cannot reduce it to the first three elaborated by psychoanalysts in the past. When I say that, I refer to a clinical category as one thing only, as a category that assists us as analysts in directing the treatment. This is it. So when I say autistic neurotic, I mean a particular category that will dictate a different type of treatment. This is most simply. In another way, maybe in a more psychoanalytic way, I might say it is a category that will dictate how the transference is handled. This is a Freudian way to say it. If we say it in a Lacanian way, it is a category that will dictate what position exactly will the analyst take within the transference. And the analyst doesn't take the same position in the transference with the neurotic as the analyst takes with the psychotic, because that could be catastrophic. Yes, that could be catastrophic. We can get into that if you want. And my argument is, in fact, that when I say that autism is a singular subjective structure, I mean that it necessitates a distinct direction to the treatment. That is it. That is it. And look, this might be a bit counterintuitive, because what I'm saying is nothing of the order of ontology here. I know your listeners have some knowledge of philosophy, so I allow myself to use these big words. What I mean in the fact that autism has nothing to do with ontology for me is the fact that autism is not something, and I'll be a bit provocative here, is not something that manifests itself outside of the psychoanalytic clinic. It is a category for the direction of the treatment. It is not that there are psychoanalytically autistic people walking in the world. Autism exists within the transference, within the psychoanalytic transference and the way it is utilized. And when we leave the practice, when we leave the clinic, this category loses its meaning. It is a bit senseless, psychoanalytically speaking. We might say then, if it is not an ontological category, we might say that it is an ethical category. It is a category that has to do with the ethics of psychoanalysis, how one should practice analysis, how would the analysand and the analyst partake in psychoanalysis. It says something about the way you do it, how you should do it, with a particular category at hand.
That's fascinating. I did not know that. So a million questions come to mind, and I kind of want to just start with this question between the ethics of psychoanalysis and ontologizing the concepts of psychoanalysis is one that I turn to frequently, because there is a sense in which Lacan has implicit ontology. Everyone does, right? But how much is he doing ontology? I mean, I don't think so, but someone like Alenka Zupancic or Slavoj Žižek, clearly they are. And they'll use the concepts. But at the level of the discourse that you're engaging with this term most seriously, you are saying, no, it's strictly a useful category. It's just how to approach and how to ultimately play my role as an analyst. But then, would you then also say that the other three terms, the other three structures, are also the exact same thing? There's not neurotics walking around. There's not psychotics walking around. These are hopefully useful terms of art for within the actual practice itself.
Yes, I mean, psychoanalytically speaking, there are no neurotics walking around. For Woody Allen, there are. You can watch his movies. He is the epitome of that. He incorporates that.
Which one?
Woody Allen.
No, but which is his structure?
Oh, the neurotic one, right? He's okay. the pure neurotic. It is so pure that it's comical. And you see that. And I mean, but this is again, neurosis as interpreted from a different type of discourse, a different perspective, not what I would say a psychoanalytic one. And when I say this, I mean, and I will maybe oppose a little bit what you were saying earlier, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I think this is the way Lacan viewed psychoanalysis. Because, in his lectures, and most of his publications are, in fact, lectures or papers that were derived from talks that he gave. They were all aimed at psychoanalysts. The audience was psychoanalysts. At a certain point, they became quite popular, and then some other people came.
He was forced into the public in a sort of sense, as Todd McGowan was just talking about earlier. I didn't even know about that. He had two teaching institutions, and then lost them both within the same year. And then Althusser's institution was basically well, you have to make it public if you're going to teach it. And so it's he kind of explodes into the public, and it's I didn't know that. That's fascinating. Yeah. Exactly.
And I think, maybe we cannot say that he didn't like it. I wouldn't venture to say that, but again, that's Lacan the person. But I'm thinking about Lacan's psychoanalysis and its ethics, and I think that psychoanalysis for him is an ethics that is applied by psychoanalysts. And he's very explicit. He's been very explicit about this many times, going against what he called applied psychoanalysis, which is, taking psychoanalysis and maybe using it abusing it a little bit in describing phenomena that are not psychoanalytic. So, I mean, everyone can watch a movie, read a book, and speak about the Oedipal character of the relationship between the characters, etc. But this is kind of like, you know, what Karl Popper had sort of said in his critique of psychoanalysis. You know, he was saying this is a theory that is completely not refutable. You cannot refute it because you can find it everywhere. He was also critical of Marxism, right? Popper, he was saying, look, we can see that everywhere, and this is for me not a good theory. And I think that Popper's critique, it bites. It's interesting, but I think he speaks of applied psychoanalysis rather of psychoanalysis itself. But that is not to say, and again, I don't want to get to trouble with some colleagues, and you've mentioned people from the Ljubljana school and that do a lot of very interesting and important work. And you've mentioned Todd, who does amazing work in the field of film studies. This is not to say two things. First of all, and we see Lacan doing it as well, Lacan engaged a lot with philosophy, with literature, with art, but he didn't do that in order to say, oh, look, this is the Oedipus there. He went into these fields in order to learn something new within psychoanalysis. And I think this is not applied psychoanalysis, but this is how psychoanalysis engages with the cultural in order to develop itself. And this is due to the fact, this very simple fact that Lacan speaks about, and I think Lacanian analysts abide by, the fact that for Freud, the unconscious is not an object that is solely individual. It is not idiosyncratic per se, because it always involves within it something of the cultural. The unconscious is a very interesting type of object because it is, on the one hand, individual, but on the other hand, it's also cultural. And I think Lacan uses the Mobius strip to demonstrate this kind of interesting non-duality. I don't know how you would call that exactly. And this means that, well, there is something to do with psychoanalysis when we think about culture. So I'll make this little disclaimer. But again, if you ask me what is ethically psychoanalytical, well, we can surely say that the direction of the treatment is what is at stake for the ethics of psychoanalysis.
So I like this distinction between. I've been thinking a lot with this distinction between the theory and using the theory in a more philosophical way and this applied psychoanalysis. And actually, when we were on tour here in the States, which is like the precursor to the European tour that is coming up in May. And so we're looking forward to seeing you in Berlin on that tour. By the way, everybody, wanted to get my little plug in there. But when we were in LA area for the tour, Catherine Liu from Irvine College, author of Virtue Hoarders, she was there, and she did a presentation on how much she stood to benefit from analysis and how much she appreciates analysis. And also she was doing this as a critique of the Ljubljana school. I mean, it was more like a kind of like, she didn't like take it on full frontal. It was more, she was more doing like this homage to her analyst who had passed away. And just defending the idea of this as a clinical practice, you know, and she definitely does not see the value in the film studies usage of it, or in I mean, it gets used in debate clubs, it gets used in literary criticism, it gets used in all kinds of things. And she's just like, no, it's a bunch of virtue hoarding nonsense. When people are using it this way, they're just using fancy words, and it's bullshit. I might be mischaracterizing her. Sorry, Catherine, if I am, but I think that's basically kind of the sense of it. People in the chat, let me know if you think that there's anything I'm missing there. But for me, it is important. the idea of the practice. But taking it back to you raised the question of whether you were actually arguing with me or not with with what I'd said about Lacan having ontology. I just wanted to say I'm trying to say that he's not doing ontology, and that I've argued that with theory friends or fellow travelers in the past. But from this sort of Heideggerian standpoint that I can't really get away from at a certain level, everyone is always already disclosing being. Everyone is ontological. Everyone has or is ontological in the sense that, like, you have a fundamental default assumption, a set of presuppositions as to what constitutes reality and what makes it what it is. And that the word is, and when you say is, am, are, any of these ways of saying it, obviously in German there's a bunch of other ones, but like that they're all ultimately getting at you've got some kind of a sense for what it means to be. And that's all I'm saying, is that Lacan has a sense for what it is to be, but that's not his practice. That's not what he's doing. And so I think I agree with you. And I guess you do see a value, though, or at least like there's a lot of great stuff coming from the applying it to culture, applying it to society. But I guess this all kind of culminates in the big question, like, are you proposing that it's not advantageous for instance, me to think of myself as an obsessional neurotic and to think of someone else as a hysteric neurotic and then have questions about whether someone might be psychotic? Like, are you saying that, like, yeah, these are for analysts. Me, who's like, this is all really interesting, I'm not doing myself a service thinking within these categories?
Well, you're thinking about it in a different way. And as I started, this is how I started our talk today, saying that thinking about autism economically is not something that is, morally reprehensive. It is, on the contrary, I think it is morally advantageous to give money to children who are struggling. And again, so I'm saying thinking about autism as a structure of society, for instance, I don't know. I'm not saying it is something wrong or useless, but I'm just saying that it will not be a psychoanalytic engagement with this psychoanalytic concept. Again, it is somewhat agnostic. I'm not making a normative judgment here. I'm just saying that, descriptively saying that it will be a different signified that you are engaging with here. It's the same signifier, but the concept that will do work in your mind is not a concept that we might equate with this ethical category that we call autism within the scope of an analysis. And Dave, let me plug in just something a little bit, just so we won't forget what you said earlier, and I could reply about being, like you were saying, and I appreciate Heidegger. I think he has a very interesting philosophy. But psychoanalysis is not about what is. The object of psychoanalysis is not an object that is. It is not. It is exactly an object that is not. It is not being that Lacan is interested in. He's interested in non-being.
Nothingness.
The unconscious is non-being, what he calls a manque à être, a lack of being, a want to be, something that is not but wants to. This is what is interesting for analysts, let's say. Being would be a question of the ego. What the ego is. Who am I? Who am I in society? Who am I in relation to other bodies? This is a question of signifiers that fill up in this place of non-being. Yeah, the ego is a failed attempt to fill up what is non-being. So for Lacan, and he says that explicitly, I think, in his paper on the direction of the treatment, which is one of my favorites. that psychoanalysts are not interested in being in this sense. But more, he says, it's much more difficult for the analyst not to take the place of being for the analysant, but actually it's much more difficult to take the place of non-being. A place where there is no word, there is no meaning that could designate sufficiently. And we might say this is the problematic notion of the desire of the analyst for Lacan, right? Because it is opaque, it is completely indeterminable. Well, and it is a driving force for analysis then.
So then my big question follows from a fear.
Okay.
It's a knee-jerk, like, okay, well, if you're going to come along and say, yes, there's these three structures. There's always been these three structures. They've been very useful in psychoanalysis, but there's a fourth structure. But then say, well, what ultimately makes it this fourth thing is that it's useful in the clinic for dealing with something that's specific, that needs to be dealt with in a different way than the traditional approaches to dealing with the other three. Yes, and historically that was psychosis, right? It was people were tending to deal with the autistic subject as a psychotic, which was not good. It was not a great outcome. And so you're saying, no, there's definitely needs to be a different approach here. But then the fear is that results in anybody who might be looking into any other thing. Oh, I do borderline personality disorder, or I do multiple personalities, or I do whatever. It's the point that the DSM-5, because it has so many niche categories, any one of those, someone might come along and go, well, that one should be dealt with different than how these have been traditionally dealt with, because obviously the schizophrenic or the borderline personality or the bipolar, or like any of these could have been called treated as a psychotic or something like that as well. And so I guess the dams could break, and then all of these different areas in the DSM-5 that are diagnostic categories, not psychoanalytically informed, will then become something that people are calling structures. That's the fear. And so I guess that sets up the question. I forgot that there was a question. And the question is the difference between a diagnostic category and a structure.
Right. It's a very good question. I'll start by saying that you only see these manuals moving towards a more, let's say, utilitarian perspective in recent years. So where you see, for instance, in the ICD-11, the ICD is the DSM version for Europe. So the ICD-11 that came up just a year ago, you see that they sort of took out some categories because they were saying, yeah, that's great. These are sort of taxonomies that we enjoy doing, but they don't mean anything different in terms of handling these people. So we speak about a lot of personality disorders. They had histrionic personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and now they're out of the book. But here I think that the way that these manuals are aimed at being used is, first of all, in terms of, and I'll say it, medication. So first of all, they're manuals that I think are in charge of distributing the capital that goes into pharmaceutical companies. Again, that's not saying that there's necessarily a sinister psychiatrist standing there and wanting to, get some people rich, because these drugs have effect on people. They clearly affect the body in a very drastic way. They change many things about the body, but it's a lot about that, the question of this type of treatment. And then I think that what I might use Lacan's words in order to make a distinction here between the structural perspective in psychoanalysis and the sort of behavioral diagnostic perspective of these manuals on two levels. First, I think that, and Lacan makes this distinction, he says that the analyst does not direct the patient, they direct the treatment. So this is one, I think, crucial difference between, let's say, I would say, psychotherapists working with these manuals in comparison to those psychoanalysts, that the psychoanalyst, well, at least some schools in psychoanalysis, because definitely most of the schools come to direct the patient, but there's a very important position that the analyst takes, that he is not there to, let's say, push the person in a particular direction. The analyst is there to handle the transference, to maintain it as the driving force of the analysis. That's a first thing. And the second thing is that structural diagnosis in psychoanalysis does not base itself on apparent behavior. So, for instance, there's a list of behavioral categories in the DSM that you'll have to observe with your patient in order to diagnose them as being psychotic, being schizophrenic in this particular category. One of them is delusions. A second one is hallucinations, for instance. Ego disturbances, depersonalization, disorientation, all of these categories. Now, while it's true that many psychotic patients suffer from hallucinations, it is also true that some neurotic patients suffer from hallucinations. So the problem with these kind of diagnostic perspectives is that they solely rely on the question of observable behavior. Whereas in psychoanalysis, one makes a diagnosis not because the patient says, I had a hallucination, or not because the patient is delusional in one sense or another. One pays attention to the way, I want to say it a bit more simply, to the way the logic of the world is constructed from the standpoint of the patient itself. We might say the particular relationship that one takes to a world that they construct themselves. If we want to be a bit less simple, less general, more specific, that is, you can say that we pay attention to the way language is used to compensate for an inherent deficiency, an inherent problematic in human existence. Language is used in different ways in order to attempt to bridge that gap. We can get we can go in that direction if you want.
That is exactly the direction that I want to go, because I feel like the whole question of the DSM-5 or the ICD-11, and on the one side, the psychiatric industry, good, bad, and ugly. One of the things we didn't talk about is the experimentation of drugs, which is, I mean, they're all being experimented with, which means that like working class and middle class children are ultimately guinea pigs, which is for me a big problem, just from a class position. But also there's lots of good. There's lots of good, and some people really need their meds, and blah blah blah. But setting aside like the critique of psychiatry, there's also, of course, like the astrologization of the categories, because people, it's the same way you hand the person the book. Okay, I'll give you the diagnosis, whatever. People do that already, right? Like that's the point. If they're coming to you and they're like, I have this, okay, well, they've done some looking around on the internet probably at this point. But to set all of that aside, like the structure, one of the things I like about the idea of of a structure coming out of like a sort of structuralist background, whether or not you think that Lacan was a structuralist or not, like having an orientation to that as a sort of background condition. There is this question of outside of like a taxonomy, which is like the diagnostic approach, what makes a structure is these aren't singular in the sense that they are isolated out, kind of, this appears over here and it's just, we can look at it, and then this appears over here. No, their singularity is structured. And then the traditional three structures are structured in a relation to language. Is that correct? Is that ultimately what it comes down to, and what you were basically just saying?
Well, that's the means through which structure is formed.
Is through language.
But again, I mean this in a very a much more rudimentary way. It's not language as the English language. It's not that one is structured according to the English language. We can think about it, let's say, very young babies theoretically experience a world, but record no memory of it, at least not a conscious memory of it. If we want to sort of make a thought experiment, let's think of these very, very early young babies, and I don't think that is the case, but just for the sake of this thought experiment, there's something like a lens of a camera without a film, right? They see the world, the photons go through their eyes, it goes through some, there's some system that they go through, but they're not recorded anywhere. There's no means to record them. And let's say language in the way that I perceive it, at the moment where something is recorded. And this something is not necessarily a memory. It is something. It is a line. It is a division. It is something. It is something very, very basic that only means that something happened in the real, let's say, or something happened, and it gains a certain existence within the chronology, history, existence world of the subject. Now, it doesn't have to be that I've seen a lion and now I have a picture of a lion on my brain. This is not what I mean. I mean that there was an experience and something was recorded of it. Something, it could be a 1 or a 0. Something was recorded. Language is the means we use to record something. So this is what I mean with language. And this is why it's very easy to understand what I mean here in terms of, language determines structure, because structure is what remains. Structure is something that remains from point A to point B. And in order for something to remain, to persist, something has to be recorded. And language is what records. Basically, that's the case. And there are different ways to use language in order to make these very early, let's say, records. Freud spoke about it in terms of fixation. He was much more talented in making us sort of grasp his ideas, because he was saying there are fixations at an early age. Right? He says there's the drive. The drive operates. It develops in a way that is unforeseeable. And at a certain moment, boop, it stops developing and it's stuck at the same point because something is fixated and it keeps working in the same way forever. That's at least, let's hope that analysis can do something with that. But Freud says that there is a fixation. A fixation is this kind of inscription. And Freud says it's not an inscription of an idea. It's not that you have this sort of an idea, a particular fantasy. Something is inscribed. He says the drives are something in between the idea and the body. It is not something that is intellectual, and it is not something that is corporeal. It is on the threshold, as we started this talk.
Right.
So language is exactly that thing that is inscribed on the threshold of the body and the idea. And if you wish, I'll give you an even more compelling example right now, if you'll allow me.
Yeah. Oh, please.
Yeah. So this is an idea I borrow from Lacan, who borrows this from a philosopher called Uexküll. He's a German. I think he was. He was into theorizing about species, about animals. Ethnologist, yeah, and he wrote many interesting papers and books about ticks. For instance, he has a very interesting example about the tick that is sort of famous. He says that the tick lives in its own environment. There's a word in German that is used here that is useful. It's called Umwelt, U-M-W-E-L-T, Umwelt. And in German, you have the word Innenwelt, which is the inner world, let's say.
Yeah.
There's the Außenwelt, the outer world. And then there's the Umwelt. Now, Umwelt is translated to English as environment.
Right.
But you'll find it in French as milieu. So you have... for speaking of milieu. So it's something that is, let's say, a more domesticated universe. It is a universe that, according to Uexküll, belongs to a particular species. So he speaks about the Umwelt of the tick. And he says that the tick has an Innenwelt, which is composed of its instincts, the tick's instincts. The tick can smell a particular secretion, a chemical secretion that has to do with mammals' sweat. And it can sense heat, and it can smell the skin, and when it's on an animal's skin, it will go to a particular dark place, and it will lodge its teeth into the skin and start sucking blood, and it can taste the blood. And what he's saying is that the instinctual world of the tick and the appropriate behaviors that we see it expressing is specific to the tick itself. So he says the tick lives in an Umwelt, which is a tick Umwelt. It's not the Umwelt of humans. We see things in 3 dimensions. Yeah, we hear things. Yeah, we are situated in a world that is humanized. We have our own Umwelt. And Uexküll was saying that every animal has a different Umwelt. We do share the Außenwelt. We share this, let's say, hypothetical universe, but there is an environment that is purely human, and this is where we live in. Yes, whatever we can perceive of, we can conceive of, is necessarily part of our Umwelt. Now, why have I rambled on about this? In order to give you an example and then give you a counterexample. So I want to give you an example for a wild animal. And when I say wild, I mean here not that it goes wild, but that it is surviving in the wild. It doesn't need anything. It's born into the world, into the Umwelt, and its instincts are already fit to ensure its survival and procreation. This, let's say, is the epitome of natural selection. Yeah, it is what evolutionary theorists dream about. This beautiful bird, and it's born and it's already set. It's fit, and it will survive and procreate, and it will be beautiful. So this is a wild animal, and let's say that the perfect wild animal, which is a hypothetical animal because no such animal exists. I'll give you an example. There's a particular type of beetle in Australia, which is wild, naturally, that went extinct because instinctually it was compelled to have sex with beer bottles. They looked too much like their mates, and they would mate with beer bottles, and the species went extinct because of all the Australians that threw beer caps.
No. For real? This is real?
You get. I swear that I read it in a very interesting article that I can send you.
This is what's happening with people today with pornography.
For humans, it must not surprise us, and I'll get to that in a second. But I'm just saying that there is no such thing as a purely wild animal, but let's imagine that there is, in order to say the following thing. A wild animal can be described as an organism where the Innenwelt and the Umwelt are in complete, let's say, harmony. There is a relationship between them that is very, very close. An animal is born and is ready for its Umwelt. If you see a horse giving birth, you'll see that the little horse, it already walks around. It sniffs the world. It's somewhat ready for the Umwelt. But when we speak about people, about humans, that's definitely not the case. Babies are born underdeveloped, half-baked. If you set a baby free in the wild after it's born, it will not walk around, it will not sniff around, it will die. Yes, no human will survive whatsoever without very close care. Humans are born, we might say, with a gap, with a rupture between the Innenwelt and the Umwelt. Our hardwired instincts are not sufficient at all in order to get us in connection with our Umwelt. We are born with this gap. And what I argue is that language is the means through which we are able to suture this gap. And I use this word suture because it's not a mending, it's not a bridging. It is something that is somewhat defective. It is a compensation. It is not a solution. Because, you know it, right? You said you are neurotic. Life is always a piece of shit, right? This is always behind the corner is a piece of shit. This is how it goes. But I think you are not wrong when we say this psychoanalytically. There is always a gap between the Innenwelt and the Umwelt in language, in this very wide sense, in the way that it makes inscriptions that enable us to do something that will let's say, suture our instinctual hardwired dimension and the Umwelt, the humanized world. Language enables us to do this. And when I speak about clinical structures, I mean I discuss particular ways to do with language in order to create this suture between the Innenwelt and the Umwelt. Every subject is born with this rupture. Every human is born with this rupture, and we do something with it. We do something with it by relying on language. In psychoanalysis, we are dealing with subject that did something with it using language, but something went wrong. Whatever they did is not working anymore, and the work with them will determine itself on the basis of the way that they use language to do with this rupture.
That's excellent. And with our final 10 minutes here, I'm going to cease asking questions and allow someone else to ask a question, actually. My fellow traveler, Michael Downs, aka Mikey, for the people here at Theory Underground, has a blog called The Dangerous Maybe. And he writes philosophy, he writes theory, he's studied it for over 20 years, and he studied it for a long time before actually going into the labor force, and since then he's been like a wage laborer due to his conditions. I only say all of that because like the ultimate goal with Theory Underground, one of the big ones, is to employ him full time so he can quit his stupid warehouse gig that keeps him away from the theory that he loves. But, you know, he's the one who's ultimately taught me Lacan. So every one of my stupid questions is his fault. I'm just kidding. No, he's actually not responsible, but, you know, has made it so that I am able to approach a lot of these concepts. And he's taught a lot of us. In fact, there's a lot of videos for free on my channel. And for Christmas, I am re-releasing all of the full, basically lectures that he gave me on this channel. Anyway, so setting that aside, Mikey's got a question for you. I'm going to play it. It's a voice message that he sent me from work. He's at work listening to us right now. And so let's hear what he has to say. 3, 2, 1.
Hey, Dave. Hey, Leon. Just want to say really great talk. Really have enjoyed it. I'm at work right now, so I've been listening. I've been in and out with it, but I'm going to go back and listen to all of it later on. But really enjoying this. Great stuff on autism and the clinical structures. You guys kind of touched on Žižek and the Ljubljana school. Leon, my question for you is, if we do think more in Žižekian terms for a moment, what do you think about if we say a certain institution is hysterical or a certain political movement is perverted? Because I am like my thinking, my work is more rooted in Žižekian critique of ideology and Todd McGowan's work on ideology and capitalism. And so I do this whole like social theory in combination with psychoanalytic theory. That's really kind of the core of where I'm at with theory. But with somebody like yourself who has spent so much time thinking in terms of the clinic, I'm curious to know what you think about, you know, this thing like, well, you know, political institutions or political figures. Oh, you know, you can say Trump's a figure of the pervert. Okay, well, is he a sadist? Is he a masochist? Right? When we do this stuff, like I'm just curious to see what you think of this aspect of doing social theory from this Lacanian perspective, which, I mean, at some point we start, if we keep thinking along these lines, we go, well, how much is Lacan and how much is Žižek, right? Because Žižek always just uses Lacan and just uses Hegel, uses these names and uses concepts they developed, sometimes it's easy to forget that Žižek is doing things with these concepts that Lacan and Hegel themselves didn't do. So, yeah, okay, this is getting a little too long here, but yeah, I'm just interested in your thoughts on how we apply the psychoanalytic concepts to institutions and political figures and stuff like that.
At least he apologized for the long message, you know, like sometimes you get people, they go on a lot longer than that, like me. But anyway, no, let's, I feel like you kind of have touched on this, but I don't think you've really talked about like the actual, the value that you do see in it, if you see some value in it.
Yeah, let's touch it a little bit more. So I was saying that what is so interesting about the unconscious for Freud, which is the object of psychoanalysis, this is the object of this particular, one might say, science, practice. This is its object. You know, an object defines a science. And in this sense, the object of psychoanalysis has nothing to do with the object of psychiatry, for instance. The object of psychoanalysis is a heterogeneous object that has no designation, that cannot be pinned down. And this is why one says that an analyst can only strive to become an analyst, first of all, through their own analysis. Because there is no knowledge that you can acquire in the university that will teach you about the object of psychoanalysis or that will give you a familiarity with it. One becomes familiar with the unconscious in analysis. It is an experience, even an experience of the body, one might say, rather than an intellectual experience. And this is something that many analysts struggle with who come to analysis in order to engage with some type of analytic pursuit. But again, I'm reducing this to different trajectories. So let's speak about neurotic subjects that come to engage with an intellectual pursuit. But what is so interesting about this object, as I was saying, is that it is not purely individual. It is also has to do with culture, with the big other. As Lacan was saying, there is one is always appealing to the big other. Even when Robinson Crusoe is on the island, or even better, Tom Hanks is on the island. He is addressing another in his thoughts, in his fantasies, in whatever is going on, and eventually he epitomizes it in this ball. If you remember this little volleyball that he engages with. But
Wilson, yeah.
Exactly. This means something very interesting for psychoanalysis, and then also for Mike, right? Mike was asking the question.
Yes.
For psychoanalysis, it's very important because it means that the subjects that we engage with in the clinic will change when society changes. So this means that we will see different symptom formations. We will see different ways to relate to the signifier. We will see different ways to, as we said, do with language in order to suture the gap between the Innenwelt and the Umwelt. There is no promise that we will forever stay with the Austrian hysteric of Freud's time. I myself have not encountered so many analysins that fall into this particular category. We might say that something changed. And this dictates a change in psychoanalysis itself. So you see, the change in culture changes the psychoanalytic praxis. And this is where we must theorize about this relationship. And for instance, I'll give you a very pertinent example, that in the time of Freud, in the time of many psychoanalysts, even in the US after the Second World War, there were particular forms of interpretation that were very powerful. One would come to the analyst, and the analyst would tell, and he would say that he is fighting with a friend, I don't know, whatever, and the analyst would say, look, what you are clearly doing is insisting on denying some homoerotic urges that you have. And that would blow their mind. They were like, oh my God, that is, and they will start associating about something that they didn't associate about before. Today, when someone comes to see me, for instance, and partake in an analysis, I don't even, it's not that I even say it. The analyst will say it to you. Oh yes, I fought with my friend yesterday, and this is because I have repressed homosexual urges. It's so ingrained in culture that these interpretations, they've lost their value. And today, in the Lacanian orientation, we have to be inventive in thinking about new ways to interpret, to intervene. And this shows you culture changes, psychoanalysis changes. So we must theorize about that. That's for me. But that goes the other way as well. So that goes the other way as well, right? Because when the subject changes, we can then infer something of the cultural as well. But what I'm saying is that you need to do a lot of work in order to make that viable. And not, let's say, fall into this category of applied psychoanalysis. Because if it is about showing that what I've already theorized here is also valid here, I'm not sure this is what is so important about the work that Žižek is doing, and about the work that Todd McGowan is doing, and about the work that Alenka Zupancic is doing. What they're doing is something that I think is very similar to what Lacan is doing with these fields that he engages with. He reads Descartes, for instance, But he doesn't read him in order to systematically show how his philosophy is valid within psychoanalysis. He reads him, he turns him on its head in order to say something interesting and pertinent within psychoanalysis. So I think this is what we see Žižek doing. This is what we see Zupancic and Todd and many others that, we just mentioned their names, but there's so many others that are doing this work. I think is extremely valuable, and I read it myself. And I've just recently wrote a review about Todd's book on the racist fantasy, which I found very interesting, and I even teach a course about it in the university. This shows you that there are products that are very important in this field. And again, I'm not venturing to say that they're worthless. On the contrary, I think they're very interesting and give us shed new light on these phenomena that might enable us to, as we see in psychoanalysis, create new associations.
That's
and
wonderful.
I think this is what Todd is trying to do, let's say, with his book. Create new thinking, new associations about what racism is and what we think about it and what is anti-racism.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that you used those three particular names, Žižek, McGowan, Zupancic, because they are the three from that school who actually have engaged with and participate in Theory Underground to some degree. And I'm glad that means that there's not some beef between your approach and them. And that makes me very happy, even though, I mean, beefs can be illuminating, contradictions are worth tarrying with. But as long as they're respectful and always strive to find that value in that project, then of course that's where it's at. And so thank you so much for joining us. I'll just say for folks, as far as the course goes, it begins in February on the last the last Wednesday of February, and then it goes for 3 more Wednesdays after that in March. And you can sign up at Theory Underground. I would love to bring you back before then for a follow-up. There will be a lot of questions. There's been a lot of discourse here in the live chat that we haven't been able to get to. Shout out to the Big Signorelli, aka Andrew Flores from the Vanishing Mediators. I know that he's had you on his channel before, as well as everybody else who's been engaging with him in the conversation. They bring up really important questions that I'd like to hopefully get to in the future.
No, I haven't seen it on the chat here. I should have looked somewhere else.
Oh, I don't share the actual live chat with the. I don't want you distracted, So it's on the YouTube side. You're just in the Zoom side right now. So got to keep them separated, like that song, But all right, thank you so much, and we'll see you in the near future. Take care.
Good. Okay, we talk soon.
All right.
Bye bye.
Thinking is super uncool. And that's why you should do it. It's just like almost anything that's like cool anymore. It just sucks. And I think that's like what the underground movement has always been about, is just like seeing what's in the mainstream, being like, it ain't there, and kind of like cobbling something together, and it's a little mismatched, but that's like its beauty.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, where workers with earbuds can find genuine liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
We bring primary texts from leading lights of diverse fields to bear on topical issues and works popular in our current world. Theory Underground is a publishing house as well as lecture course and social media platform. You've been reading Underground Theory.
Yes.
And
amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Jesus Christ.
Seriously.
This is a little experiment in what I, David McKerracher, can pull off without relying on the academy or the algorithmic dictates. of the attention economy.
Usually a good edited collection has good essays, but you only want to read a few. Every essay makes me want to read the other essays because you have a vision. Everyone that you invited for a reason. You weren't some fake publicist who's like, how's so-and-so's a new book? Have them on your show. No, you only talk to people because you've read shit by them, that you've thought about, that you think has value, even if you disagree. So I think that's what's amazing.
I believe that I am, like so many others, pioneering a future in which educators can form learning webs that will make learning as a way of life enjoyable and emancipatory. However, before these tools become accessible, they have to be experimented with. That's why I built my own website and app using nothing more than my own saved wages, 5 patrons, and some small classes of students over the last year. Of course, I also have had my wife Anne's moral support and help with accounting so that I don't get in trouble with the IRS or whatever. In less than a year, Theory Underground has already put out 8 courses, 2 books, one, my book, Timenergy, and the other, Underground Theory, which has over 30 contributors, including works written by students at Theory Underground, some of my fellow travelers, and colleagues in the broader universe of underground theory. Beyond the books and courses, though, you will also find interviews, reading exegetical reaction sessions, and live weekly events for working class autodidacts, independent researchers, and renegade academics. These include a variety of clubs and cohorts that meet on a weekly or monthly basis. If you want to get involved, there are 4 main subscription levels.
Think of it like a gym membership, but for your mind.
The point is to make learning, practice, and theoretical comprehension a way of life. Support at this stage of the operation is more crucial than ever because my savings were used up over the last year of getting this established. If I can triple my subscribers in the next 2 months, I can quit my gig at Amazon and focus on this work full time. All I need is a few more people at each of the levels or a couple big time patrons who just want to see it happen. Right now I am doing a patron and site subscriber drive, so excuse the commercial. But if you end up really liking what goes on at this channel, consider signing up soon. If you cannot afford it, but want to get involved with some of the stuff behind the paywall, I have made a financial aid scholarship you can sign up for here in the description. Quick side note, some people ask about the profit motive. At this point, I have not actually made a return on any of my investment in terms of the amount of time, energy that I put into things, the amount of savings I've actually put into things, the opportunity cost of the work that I'm doing as opposed to the other kinds of things that I could be doing for money. But more importantly, I don't actually make enough to pay for my cost of living. The goal is to make enough for my cost of living, and then once that is achieved, everything over that amount is going to go towards expanding the operation to the point where I can hire Michael Downs, aka Mikey of The Dangerous Maybe, to be a full-time researcher and part-time teacher at Theory Underground. All right, so with that aside, I just want to say also, if you are a worker with earbuds, what's up? I see you. I work at Amazon part-time, and everything I do is for my past self who used to work there full-time. Most workers with earbuds couldn't care less about theory, but I do believe a working class intellectual revolution could grow out of the underground theory scene. My hope is that what I have built here will contribute to making the scene something more than just a scene, and you into something more than just a scene kid. We're trying to make this into a real intellectual milieu capable of leading a way forward beyond the imminent crises facing humanity. But for that, we need thinking now more than ever.
Start thinking.
I hope that you either will or have enjoyed the program, and also make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and leave this playing in the background all the time while you're doing other things.
Playing long-form Theory Underground content in the background while you do things has, in the near future, been scientifically proven to emancipate minds from the functional illiteracy imposed on workers by the structural stultification of time energy. This is achieved by reterritorializing circumspective concern.
Also, to some degree, it is for the algorithm.
Think of it like a gym membership, but for your mind!
I love you so much.
I love you too.